Hello, everyone. Here's our plan for today. I'm going to discuss some very serious conspiracy theories with you. But first I wanted to share with you some comments or questions I have concerning our topic presentations for the next few weeks. Before we start, or if we decide to start the book of Matthew next, we finished Mark, I thought we might want to wait a little bit until more people come back that can walk through Matthew with us. And in the meantime, continue with our miscellaneous, things that we've been doing. And this week's miscellaneous will cover our plans for the next few weeks, as well as the conspiracy theory. And at the end of this class, I have a very brief quiz for you to see. Yeah, I think it'll be great fun. I do. Here are some of the topics that were proposed to me online by those of you watching online. The Sabbath. Why are there two different Sabbaths? People wanted to know. I think because they're reading the liturgy for this week that mentions if you're a Sabbath keeper, you'll have salvation. Well, which Sabbath do I have to keep? Another one was what's the difference between the law of Moses, the law that Jesus brings, and Sharia law? Try to do that in try to do that in 1 hour. That'll be interesting. But I don't know if anybody really understands what Sharia law is. It's a real thing. It's not ancient, We'll look at it. And I am going to share this with you either next week or the week that follows. A lecture I've been writing that's entitled Baby Boomers Beware. Oh, there you are. I got a review of a book, because I'm in a book club in Connecticut. Very interesting book. I'd like to share with you the contents and the possibilities of what it might mean for almost everyone at this table, except for the baby boy. This wouldn't affect you. Actually, you might love it. You might love it because it has to do with gerontocracy, which is the belief that older people have too much, and it's about time you younger people got a handle on what we have, because it's just not fair. It's just the one fair. So anyway, that's what we're gonna look at. But first, let's see if we can get through these conspiracies. And the first conspiracy that we're going to deal with, and we need to keep Mark in mind. We've just heard his interpretation of the crucifixion and the empty tomb. So we need to keep that in mind, because most scholars say that Mark's interpretation is probably the most historically accurate. We are going to talk about Matthew and Luke and John and what they add, because of course each of the evangelists are talking to a different audience, and they're tailoring their tales to the audience. But in terms of just chronological facts, theological facts, atmospheric conditions, it got dark. Some people say a real earthquake really occurred at that particular time. That's why it's noted as darkness and the trembling of the earth, not just trembling in your heart because our Lord has been crucified, because there was an earthquake. So keep all that in mind as we go through this idea, the question. And here's the question we'll look at today. Well, I'll say it as a statement. Jesus did not die on the cross. Shocking, right? Absolutely shocking. It goes right up there. My grandmother truly believed this next comment. We did not land on the moon. That was all a trick to get more money. The government can get more money from us. We did not let. And another very damaging one, the Holocaust didn't really happen the way people say it happened. It's not really real. And how about this one? UFOs are real, and there are people living among us that got off those UFOs. So today we're going to look at a different kind of conspiracy theory that has to do with the cross, not with UFOs or the moon. And the first one is called the swoon hypotheses. Swoon hypotheses. I don't know if you've ever heard of that. It originated in the 18th century when the Enlightenment, rational people, rationalists are trying to make sense of everything. You know, let's put everything logically in order. So this is the swoon hypotheses, simply stated. Jesus didn't die on the cross, he just fainted. And then the unconscious body was taken down from the cross. It wasn't a dead body. And it was taken to the tomb. And we'll go on to what happened to it from there. And the hypotheses, the swoon hypotheses, has also been called the Easter conspiracy, which includes, this really is shocking, there was no resurrection after the crucifixion. That's why there was an empty tomb. He walked out, he didn't rise out. This one actually postulates that the Jewish high priests and Jewish elders conspire with the Roman authorities, and both of them pay off the Roman guards, the soldiers who were stationed outside the tomb, not to say anything about where they're taking the body.
This is a powerful meeting. There's a lot that I've never heard before.
Oh my
He's
goodness.
alive still, coming on. I've
Off the
never
cross.
ever heard that in my life.
Oh yes.
Or assumed that.
And
who said that? Who knows
there,
that for a
there
fact?
are,
Or
it is
just-
a combination of people, and I'll get to that.
It's powerful. I've never
Yeah.
heard this before.
Yeah, well, it's been studied forever. It was rumored forever, right from the day it happened. It
So the
started,
people who brought
the
this
rumors.
cross down knew.
Oh,
they were
yeah, and they
married, or
wrote
what
about
was
it, they talked about it, and you could be, later on, of course, you could be branded a heretic and lose your life for stating things like this. It was usually kept secret. But yes, there are scholars who think that it's very possible that the crucifixion did not take place the way Mark says it did, or Luke says it did, or John says it did, that things were different. And when we talk about all the reasons why people say this, maybe, you know, you'll see, oh, I kind of get that.
I don't have it now, but
This
we'll see.
conspiracy says that the soldiers, Roman soldiers, were bribed to say, there's no body in this tomb, because those devious disciples broke into the tomb, and they did that when we were on break, so it's not our fault, of course, and they stole the body. And there are so many texts that include that kind of feeling, that were supposedly written, that we're told to, that are being shared with. And it's very interesting, I think, because this theory is still believed by many people today. They say, you know, it was all just a setup from the early Jesus movement to get people to convert. That's why we're celebrating a resurrection on Easter Sunday. Not that it took place, but because it was an excellent marketing technique.
What would be the purpose of doing that if there was no reason to convert? I mean, I'm not saying this very well. What would be the purpose of this conspiracy if there wasn't something real about Jesus in the first place that you would want people to convert to that belief? So, I mean.
Rome, power.
Yeah.
It was all about power, taking the political power from Rome and distributing it among, back where it was, with the Jewish elders, with the Sanhedrin, with that Supreme Court structure, as opposed to the Roman Empire system. So if you can put your faith in Jesus and not in the Roman emperor, it changes the course of history, it changes the way you live your life, it changes, we're talking about that on Wednesday, how it changed.
But without faith, why wouldn't you believe that conspiracy theory? You know, about the.
Well,
If you
I
don't have
think it
faith,
gets, wait, just
changes.
wait till you hear what they
Yeah.
wrote.
I thought
And
the
this
stone-
was just the first century theater, and, I mean theory, and plenty of other works followed to prove that, number one, Jesus survived the flogging. He didn't die when he was being flogged, and he survived the crucifixion, and then he was taken to the tomb where he was revived, and he got out because he recovered, and that's why he could appear all over the place as resurrected. But he wasn't really resurrected, he was just recovered.
In 3
From-
days.
So if he walked
Yeah.
out, I thought that stone was like immensely heavy.
It was impossibly
Okay,
heavy.
so now did he,
They had to have
Re-
help, yeah.
okay, so
Bribery.
he didn't do it on his own, it was a bunch of other people?
Absolutely.
That
Gee-
moved that rock?
Jesus is just a
Not
really
just-
good man, a really good preacher, a really good person to follow. And the world would be much better if we all did what Jesus told us to do. Love your neighbors,
Right.
love God. If we just followed it, just do the Torah the way we've always done it. So there were all kinds of different reasons for people to say, yeah, I'm jumping on that train. You know, it's going to be better for everyone. First of all, it's going to be better for me, is usually why people get on the train in the first place, right?
I can tell you right now, I wouldn't be crucified upside down or have my head chopped off. For
Exactly.
something that was a conspiracy.
Exactly. So, here's a quick look, a little bit, just a quick look at some of these reasons people believed it. The disciples, number one, there was this belief that the disciples stole the body out of the tomb so that Jesus's body could be used for propaganda purposes. Kind of makes sense when you think about it. Or, here's another one. The Jews who loved Jesus, because most of the Jesus followers in the early days were Jews, they stole the body so that they could honor it or they could follow it. Now there's another theory that the Romans stole it, but they couldn't hold on to it. It just disappeared. That's known as the, I swear to God, the UFO theory. Somehow.
Wow.
But then, here's another one. There is the mass psychosis theory. Witnessing this, just, it turned, and you know, sometimes when we see something horrific, there is mass hysteria, and you have these feelings. That happened with the Holocaust. I mean, soldiers came back and said, I did not see what I saw. You know, it's impossible. And then there is the old standby theory that the church just made this whole thing up. You know, they just created the whole thing so people would join their church. Now, I'm not saying that everyone believes this, but plenty of people believe parts of this story. And there are plenty, probably lots of good reasons to believe or not believe what we believe. I mean, what we believe is practically impossible to believe.
Yeah.
You know, and you try to explain it to someone and they're going, really? Really? You know, from the very beginning, from the first signs of incarnation, when Gabriel comes, well, here's how it's gonna go. You're not really gonna have sex. It's gonna be this Holy Spirit. And Mary buys it, you know, right from the beginning. You know, that's the
According to the story.
according to the story. But a lot of people will say, but wait a minute, we have eyewitnesses who testified to what they saw. And you mentioned we have that giant stone that covered the entrance to the tomb, and that stone wasn't just rolled away. John says it was actually carried away, picked up, and that's a miracle that they were able to move that stone. But of course, if we look, so many of those eyewitnesses were angels. They're the ones, and we read about one of them, right, dressed in white. They're the ones who testified to the empty tomb and the position of the grave clothes, you know, when they came in. So some people want more proof than the angels can provide, like Thomas, the disciple, Thomas, right? Well, he gets it, and he testifies that Jesus was risen. And so did all the disciples, right? They testified that Jesus ate with them, and he walked with them, and he talked with them for 40 days. And I think I believe the whole story from start to finish, but the disciples claim that the resurrection changed them. It wasn't just a life-changing experience for Jesus. It transformed them too, and we can see that. We just finished Mark, right? So we saw for 15 chapters that the disciples, those fraidy cats, right, who don't understand what Jesus is teaching them, the whole time Jesus is alive. We saw that they were scared. They were unsure of themselves. They were timid. And when Jesus was in danger of being crucified, when they got to the garden, right? Yeah, those disciples hid. And they even denied knowing them. Judas betrayed him. But after the resurrection, they were very, very different, right? It's like there's a whole new bunch of new men here now.
I've been reading Acts, and it's incredible. I mean, really, when you just start reading Acts after.
Exactly. Exactly. They all turn into Billy Graham, right? They're like, and they all just take off for parts unknown. These were hometown boys, you know. They weren't sophisticated roamers. They just take off for India, North Africa, and Lebanon and Damascus, so that they can teach and preach the gospel.
In those languages.
Yes. Yes, in different languages. Yeah. So what do you do with the questions? Are the biblical, and I was thinking of you when I wrote this, are the biblical accounts of Jesus' death myth, or are they history? Did it really happen the way the Gospels say it happened? Yes or no, yes or no. And you know, we have to really think about that sometimes. So do you think there is a dichotomy, a major difference between the Jesus of history and the Jesus that I know and I love and I worship? And I found this really interesting article that explores this question. And it was particularly interesting because it was written by a rabbi, an Orthodox rabbi. I think he was Sama, but I'm not sure. But his name is Pinchas Lapide, and he discusses the question, is the resurrection of Jesus real? Did it happen? Could it really happen? And he concludes, as an Orthodox rabbi, 21st century, right now, yes, it is real. And here's his conclusion that helped him conclude that the resurrection is real. And I kind of paraphrase this, but tried to get it as close as possible. if this depressed, defeated group of disciples, you know, the 12 that we've been reading about, if overnight they could change into a victorious movement of faith based only on auto-suggestion and self-deception without a fundamental faith experience, this would have been a much greater miracle than the resurrection itself. For one man to be resurrected would have been nothing compared to 12 men completely changed because of that one man being resurrected. And what another very interesting portion of the article, which was the majority of it, was that Rabbi shows that there is a very clear tradition in Judaism that the Messiah, who's called the son of Joseph, would be killed and resurrected. Now, did you know that?
No.
That was part of Jewish? I didn't either. And have you ever heard of the son of Joseph?
No.
You know, we think Jesus is the son of Joseph. Now, we've heard of the son of David. Yeah, he's called that also. And both the son of David and the son of Joseph are both in the eschatological rabbinical texts that describe the end of the world eschatologically. What's going to happen when the world ends? And apparently, there are lots and lots of stories about the coming of the Messiah in Jewish literature. One says, the son of Joseph will come first so that he can prepare for the son of David's arrival as Messiah. That surprised me. And the Talmud says the Messiah may come from the dead. Now, do you know what the Talmud is? Talmud. No one really knows the Talmud because it's absolutely massive, but we know some of it. So here's a quick look at what we think we know about it. We know what the Torah is, right? First five books, also called the books of Moses. You know, starting with Genesis and Exodus and Leviticus and Numbers and Deuteronomy. Now, have you ever heard of the Tanakh? The Tanakh.
No.
Tanakh is an acronym. It's in Hebrew. The T is for the first five books, Torah. The N in Hebrew stands for Nevi'im, which means the prophets. And the K is for Keduvim, which means the writings. And the writings contain the Psalms and the book of Job and Ruth and the Proverbs. Those are the writings. So the Tanakh is sort of the Old Testament, right? The Torah, the book of prophets, all the books of prophets, and all the writings. And now the next part of the Talmud consists of the oral Torah. Did you ever hear of that, oral Torah? That's what Moses got right out of the mouth of God when he went up to Sinai. God talked and talked and talked for 40 days and 40 nights. And then Moses came down, remembered it all, told everyone. But then everyone was frightened. I'm never going to remember this, even though their job was to pass it on to their children. So somebody says, we better write this down. And they did write it down. And what they wrote is called the Mishnah. Mishnah. So the rabbis from the very beginning wrote commentary about all these parts we just discussed. So they look at the third commandment, keep holy the Sabbath, or fourth commandment, depending on who's counting. And a rabbi in the 1800s writes his feeling about it, right in the margins, you know. And another rabbi, maybe 50 years later, says, I don't agree with that, and he writes his feelings. So the Talmud is this huge collection of opinions of what was written before. We call it commentary, and we have book after book after book of commentaries. So all of that put together in the Talmud. And you know that rabbis are still writing commentary, just like Christian scholars are still interpreting what Jesus said and where he said it, giving explanations and updating ancient traditions. But did it surprise you that ancient Jewish sources talk about a Messiah that rises from the dead? I never remember any of my Jewish friends talking. When the Messiah comes, eschatologically in the future, not that it happened, you know, so. Now, in the 1990s, there was this extraordinary discovery. It's interesting, some people call it an archaeological discovery, but I don't think archaeologists had anything to do with it from what I've read. Seems that there was this Bedouin traveling in the desert around the Dead Sea in what's Jordan today, and he found this 3-foot tall tablet, and it was written with 87 lines, like little passages in Hebrew, and it was sent to the experts who confirmed, determined that it was indeed a 1st century inscription. And they named this stone Gabriel's Revelation, or Gabriel's Stone. And some of it actually says in Hebrew that a future Messiah will rise 3 days after his death.
Wow.
Now, does that soothe you or upset you, right? And this information apparently was circulating in Jesus's day. So do you think that inscription is referring to Christ? It may be, right? But other people, and I have heard Jews say this, we have this big thing with the number 3, right? We worship a God in 3 persons. Well, some say that the 3 days that are referred to on this inscription are actually referring to the binding story of Isaac. You know, when Abraham grabs his son, he's going to take him to Mount Moriah, slit his throat and set him on fire as a sacrifice to God. But then God says, don't do it, and gives him a sheep to sacrifice instead. That took 3 days for Abraham to get up there, get everything set up until God stops the sacrifice. But others say that the 3 days refer to other biblical events, like from Exodus 19. Moses was on Sinai for 3 days before God reveals himself in thunder and lightning. And remember Joseph in Genesis 42, who advises his brothers to do this and live. He says it as a way to reassure his brothers that he's not going to kill him or punish them for selling him to the slavers, you know, and leaving him for dead. And it takes Joseph 3 days to explain this. So bottom line is, I think there are lots of reasons why we truly should believe in these resurrection stories that come from God, or at least that's what some people claim, they come from God. And just think about this for a minute. If there is no Sinai experience, if there's no Moses on Sinai, there's no Judaism. There's nothing to go on to. There's no Torah. And if there's no Easter, there's no Christianity. It would have split into a million different little Jewish sects.
So where does the Shroud of Turin fall within all this?
Oh, we're gonna talk about
that.
Okay,
Yeah.
because that's on Instagram. I scroll a lot, and there's a big video of that, a lot, and they're fine tuning. They're absolutely sure that was the shroud that was put. That's Jesus. But how does
Who's
that fall into?
absolutely
Yeah.
How does
sure?
that
Not
fall?
me.
I don't
They
know.
say the fabric and everything, and it's all that, they're saying almost 100%, that's the shroud, that's Jesus' shroud, and the pictures.
But can you tell me who says that?
Guys, people.
On the internet.
I don't know if anybody, I mean, these people, you
Keep
know,
that in mind, because I'm gonna talk a little bit about that,
a lot
but,
of different.
if that's
do this.
interesting to you, cause, man,
Now it is. just
we
what
got
Mike
that
said, where
shoved
does that
down
whole-
our throat in seminary, you know. Who told you you were naked, you know, that old story, the Shroud of Turin. Probably they're mostly Catholics who say that. But I didn't say that.
Well, I wasn't
I didn't
Catholic,
say
then
that.
yeah,
They
I
made a
suppose.
fortune on that shroud, yeah.
They cut off little pieces and sell it to
Yeah,
you in an
yeah.
amulet for
And
real.
that,
Oh,
that,
just to look at it, you didn't
Yeah.
have to cut pieces of,
yeah.
they made money on that way back.
Yeah, and that's what really ticked Luther off so badly. He
Mhm.
schleps to Rome, pays the money to see all these things, and he's still, you know, he still feels terrible that he's not worthy. He didn't get the grace that these items, these earthly items, were supposed to offer him. You can only get grace from God.
So, if Jesus was, what you just said to us, he didn't die after
Now,
that.
I did not say that.
Well,
Please,
I
don't tell
understand,
her.
yes.
I really
So-
believe.
So, when he was put in the tomb and laid down, if that's true, did he fall asleep? Did he say, he was
Wait till
alive?
you
Did he-
hear.
Was he
That's what I'm
breathing, but
gonna
he was
talk
just
about.
there, or was,
That's what I'm going to talk about.
The story.
did he walk
See-
around in there?
See
he was
if that
alive?
information is real or if it's just a story. So here's the story. Actually, it's a whole series of stories to show you how hard some people have worked and continue to work to show you that you need to take another look at what you think you know and about what happened when Jesus was crucified. Because, so let's start real briefly, and then I'm keeping track of questions so we can get to them. So much of what we've been reading has focused on the spices that the three ladies bring to the tomb. The spikenard, all the herbs that were used to prepare the body for burial.
By the
So,
way, if those three women came with their spices, but they knew the stone was too big to move, that doesn't add up.
no, it does
Mm.
not add up.
Mm.
And Mark even says, that's all they talked about on the way to, how are we gonna move that stone? I don't know, how do you think we're gonna move that stone? But they just kept going. And don't we do that ourselves though, in our, how the hell am I gonna get through this day? I don't know, but we just keep going. So, maybe that's the lesson. But, we believe that those spices, like the nard, and all those herbs were used to prepare the body for burial. But we need to rethink that deduction, because all those spices and those herbs and that nard were also medicines. I never thought about that, but they were real medicines back in the day, and they were made to heal a living body, not to prepare a dead body. They were used for both, but, so let's start with that old favorite crazy story, you know, that story about the nard, the spikenard. Remember Mary, maybe it was Mary of Bethany, she takes a whole pound of nard and dumps it on Jesus's feet. Now think about that, a whole pound, that's not just a little dollop of cream in your hand, right? No, and we talked about how incredibly expensive nard is, because it was imported from far away, like from Nepal, even from China. But I heard that this nard, this biblical nard in Mark, came from Afghanistan. Don't ask me who determined that, but in any case, it still cost a fortune. So where do you think Miss Mary from Bethany got the money to buy that nard? And why did she have so much of it.
Hmm.
No wonder Judas, right, was having a fit when he saw all that nard going on Jesus's feet. So where do you think Mary got it? Where did she store it? And why did she use it on his live body? So do you think it was a literary device to show the foreshadowing that she knows Jesus is going to die and she's anointing him to show us that he's going to die? And remember Nicodemus? Now we didn't read about him yet because he's in John's gospel. But do you remember his contribution to the post-crucifixion preparations? I think it's in John 12. He schleps 100 pounds, that's a lot, of myrrh and aloe with him to the tomb to prepare Jesus's body. And get this, John makes it clear that it's not 95 pounds, it's 100 pounds of myrrh and aloe. And you have no idea how many people have written about 100 pounds. And you know what that means. Then they start writing what they think it means, and you're supposed to know what it means now. Back in the day, it was a lot, and it still is a lot. So many people, okay, I'll say many scholars, people who studied the translations and the exegesis, what it meant back then, they say, well, that must mean that Nicodemus has plans to embalm the body of Jesus, not just to anoint it on the outside. That must be why Nicodemus brings so much of these fluids and these herbs to be placed within Jesus to embalm him.
But the Jews didn't embalm, did they?
Well, and very interesting, because others say just what you just said, not a chance. That's absolutely crazy,
Mhm.
because embalming was very, very rare back in the day. It was done, you could choose it then,
Not if you
but it
were
wasn't
Jewish.
easy. Well, that was before it was in the Talmud that you couldn't. So in Jesus's day, I don't even know where the proof of that is, but it's clear to some people that it was a possibility, but it was very unlikely because it was a procedure that was very difficult to do. It took special equipment, it took expertise, and Nicodemus, he was a rabbi and a judge, on the Sanhedrin. He didn't have that kind of knowledge.
John.
And it took 70 days to embalm somebody back in the day.
Oh. It's John 19, and mine says, Nicodemus had visited Jesus that night. Nicodemus brought a mixture of myrrh and aloes, about 75 pounds. Taking
Oh.
Jesus's body, the two of them, Nicodemus and Joseph,
Oh, interesting.
the two of them wrapped it with the spices in strips
Oh,
of
that
linen.
must be the 100.
This was in accordance with Jewish burial customs.
That's right, you had to anoint the body. That's right. But those are a lot of spices and the only place where there would be that much stuff, that much nard, that much myrrh, that much aloe would be at the temple. Because who really used all this stuff? The priests. The priests would have it and they would store it at the temple because it was used in ceremonial sacrifices, which of course very often were held in secret. But there is another interpretation. Many believe that since all these anointing products were actually used medically, they were meant to be used on a live body, not a dead body. Like, look at nard. Nard, even today, in some cultures, has been used to treat joint pain. And it's also very effective in dealing with heart ailments. And of course, Jesus could have been dealing with both of these problems as a result of what he had been through with the flogging and the crucifixion. And myrrh. We know myrrh, it was brought by the Magi, right, all the way from Iran, as a gift to baby Jesus. But did you know that myrrh is a very effective antiseptic? I didn't know that. It can stop the spread of infection from wounds, and it can also be used to accelerate the heartbeat of someone who's suffering from a trauma. And myrrh is also used as a purgative, a cleansing for the whole system, especially for your bowels. And same thing about aloes. Even today, aloe is used to treat the pain of wounds, and it helps the wounds to heal, and it reduces the rate of infection. And if you eat it, it'll also clean you out. And you can see all of these things would have helped a post-crucifixion patient, right? They would treat the symptoms and the recovery of the patient. So is that why those 3 women brought those items to the tomb? Or is that why Nicodemus and Joseph of Arimathea brought that stuff? So if Jesus is dead, why would they bring all that stuff in such large quantities? Well,
Where does it say? Where does it say they brought that stuff? Where?
oh, and Mark, the 3 ladies were on their way to the
That,
tomb.
okay, that 3 ladies.
And John says that Nicodemus and Joseph brought the
75
75
pounds, and then they added 25 pounds of herbs. Yeah,
That
it's,
night, that evening, I thought they left him alone that evening.
well, evening is such a strange word,
early
isn't
on the
it?
first day of the week while it was still dark. Oh, no, that's 20, that's Mary going to,
She goes back.
yeah.
But suppose this.
Wait a minute.
All right, go ahead.
Okay.
Well, tell
They
me,
bring 'em- they
tell
bring
me
'em-
what you're trying to prove.
I'm not trying
Oh,
to
okay.
prove anything, I'm trying to find out where all this jargon is coming from.
Gospels.
Because-
They're all 4
Okay.
Gospels mention what we've just discussed, that herbs were brought to the tomb at different times, and there were different encounters at the tomb, but herbs were brought there to anoint the body for burial. And we talked a little bit about this. I think you were here when we said, you know, what is he doing in a cave even? You know, he should be in the ground, right? But we said at that time a cave was considered the ground. So before the final burial, he's anointed, he's rubbed, he's touched with oils and herbs and lotions for
When?
odor
I'm
control.
saying, Not when they bring it to the,
When they take him down from the cross.
and they put him in the thing, and that's,
And you know,
But
hold
that-
on to that.
isn't that the whole, you don't do anything at that time, that you have to,
No, they did. They did, at that time.
sundown
They,
is,
they put him, let me finish because we're gonna talk about Joseph, cause he's the first one who gets his hands on the body from Pontius Pilate. So what if Jesus was given a sedative before he was crucified? That's why he couldn't keep his head up, right? It's like that, right?
that's that wine, sour
Definitely.
wine or
Oh my God.
whatever.
His heart, right, it would have slowed down with the sedative. So they would definitely need a medicine to speed it up again, get it beating regularly. So that's why they brought the stimuli with them. And definitely they'd want to flush out his system. And because their infection must have been flowing through his body. And they needed to tend to all those wounds to stop the infections so that they can get Jesus ready for what is coming next. Jesus has got to make appearances all over town. He's got something to sell here, and he's got to sell it in person. He's got to show people follow me, and this is your future. You'll be resurrected too. So that's the kind of setup that some people are setting up. And you have to think, because of the Sabbath, the Bible describes, all four Gospels, that Jesus had a very hasty burial. So things don't happen the way they usually do at a normal Jewish burial, because they have to rush. Shabbat is coming. For example, they don't use a kurios, which is kind of a shroud, a long piece of linen that kind of wraps around the body. It swaddles the body, and it binds up the hands and feet to the body. Instead, and it's written, I think, in I think just the synoptics, I don't think John uses the word, but in the other three, the linens are described as anonio, not a karios, and that means much larger pieces of linen that could be used for a quick wrapping, not swaddling clothes, but just probably a piece almost as long as this table, where you put the body down and just roll them up in the linens.
But he was
And-
aware, he was alive.
And
That's what
that
I'm saying.
would conceal
He
a
knows everything they
breathing
did to him.
body. No one would see Jesus struggling to breathe. They would just assume
Oh my
he's
God.
dead. So Jesus was not wrapped Lazarus style. Remember when Lazarus walks out of the tomb, he's all bound up like a mummy. But everyone who is in on the conspiracy, all of them are doing everything they can to make Jesus look dead. And of course, all the disciples are in on it. They're all faking his death, so that the Jewish authorities never suspect that he is alive. So that's why they send the women, and they send the very influential Jewish leaders like Nicodemus and Joseph to treat Jesus as a dead body that needs spices for anointing. But they make sure there's plenty of ointment there to treat his wounds, to help Jesus heal. So just imagine, Jesus has been whipped viciously. He's been pierced by nails in his hands and in his feet. So of course he needs a poultice, right? Cleaning agents for his wounds, and drugs that can be used for anesthesia. But he can still be considered a body being anointed for burial. And this surprised me too. I actually looked this up very carefully. If you're wondering how anyone could have survived what Jesus went through, there are lots and lots of stories about victims who actually survived crucifixions. And you know Josephus, right? That Roman Jewish historian. He tells one of many stories of survival. It seems that two of his friends I think three of his friends were crucified, or his acquaintances were crucified on the same day. And two of them died on the cross, but one of them survived to tell the story. And they say that when you walked, after these mass crucifixions, when 2 days later, when you walked by, you could still hear the victims saying, help me, get me down. They survived.
Maybe they didn't do as much damage to them. as
Like they did to
more
Jesus.
to Jesus,
Yes.
and the less to these guys,
Oh,
that's
Jesus
why they
was-
survived. Did they
Jesus
whip
was-
them with everything and tear their
I
back
know.
up and
I
a little
know.
softer to them?
But how about this? And Cindy can back us up here, because she's actually been there. No one really knows where the crucifixion took place. Does that sound reasonable to you?
Yeah, but I think they just discovered it yesterday.
Oh, yesterday.
It's on
Well,
YouTube.
Where,
It's on
It's
YouTube.
not you.
I hadn't had time to watch it. But
Where do we
But now
think?
they know exactly where it was.
where do we think it took place?
Oh, Lord.
Golgotha, right. which is a Hebrew and an Aramaic name for a hill near the city of Jerusalem. In Latin, what do we call the same place? Calvary. Yeah, we know Calvary. They both mean the place of the skull. And in 326, you know the Emperor Constantine's mother?
Yes.
She's a hoot.
Helen,
Helena, Saint Helena. She actually founded a church. You were there.
On the spot.
Yep,
I didn't.
right on the spot, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And sepulchre is a word that means cemetery or burial ground. But today, people are still debating about who is buried there and where exactly is that person buried and what land is really holy and why is it holy. And of course, it's caused huge battles. Many historians say that most of the crucifixion victims were just ripped off the cross or the scaffolding and just tossed into a mass grave, and that kind of makes sense. And they've kind of identified, I wonder if this is where you're talking about, sort of in that northeast corner near the Temple Mount of all places. But arguments still going on, debates still, how do you translate various words? And some say Golgotha is not really Golgotha, it's really Gugolet, which means rolls down, like the hills in the Kingdron Valley roll into soft, gentle burial mounds. Or, and I thought this was interesting, Gugolet can also be translated as a ball of dung. Which sounds lovely, I know. But remember, in first century Judaism, and in some Jewish communities, this is still true, death is considered to be an unclean place or an unclean condition. So anyone touching a corpse would have to be ritually cleansed. You'd have to get a special blessing. So no surprise that a burial mound would have a lot in common with a dung heap, right? They're both unclean, unsavory places. And right near there, it's got to make a little sense, right? Because one of the gates, all the gates into Jerusalem, it was a walled city at one time, they're named, and one of them is called the Dung Gate, which is very close. You've heard of the Dung Gate? Well, bottom line is, we don't know for certain where Jesus was first taken directly after the crucifixion, or even exactly where he was crucified. A lot of people believe they do know, and I mean scholarly, verifiable scholars think they do. But there's still debates, and but what I found very interesting is these debates started right after Jesus was crucified. So people like Lazarus and Peter were fighting about it. And God knows Peter was fighting with Paul about it, exactly what happened, because they were all vying for power after Christ died. Who was going to take over the movement? And Paul is fighting with James. Paul is in Antioch and James is in Jerusalem, and they're fighting for control of the early Jesus movement. And way to get that power is to get the facts about Jesus, make it marketable, which is a horrible word, but it's exactly what the early Christian movement did fantastically well. They marketed this tiny, tiny Jewish sect into the world's largest religion today. Now, did you know that there's a whole gospel named the Gospel of Lazarus?
No.
I couldn't read the whole thing, but Lazarus claimed that it was really Peter who was most responsible for Jesus' death, not Judas. Now, who knows? But then when Paul got some power, he actually outlawed the reading of the Lazarus gospel, and he replaced it with his own stories about Jesus. Now, when you were in Jerusalem, did you ever go into Hezekiah's tunnel?
I don't think so.
Ancient, of course, Hezekiah was a king. They built a tunnel to get water from outside the city into the city so they could withstand sieges. And many people believe that that's where the body of Jesus was hidden after the crucifixion until he recovered in Hezekiah's tunnel. But when you think about the end of the life of our Savior, do you think that there's just one story about it in just one gospel? Because if we read, and we'll do that if you so desire, when we read all four gospels, there really are four different stories there, but we kind of put them together to make one story. But I have been told that probably the most accurate account of the crucifixion and but not really a resurrection story, but the crucifixion story is in Mark. Mark is probably the most verifiable historically. So let's see what you think. You could take these.
Sarcastic?
It's not a,
Quiz?
this is not a test.
No, yeah. I'm sorry.
This is just
A little quiz.
a little thing
little
to
quiz,
see,
okay.
to see if, oh, here comes more. If we, you got one? If we remember what we think we read. And you know, this is not, just shout out the answers. Or whatever you choose to do. How many pieces of silver did Judas get for betraying Jesus? 30 pieces. And in that painting, apparently, in that hand that's clenched, you see, you know where Judas is in this painting, Leonardo da Vinci's painting. Yeah, here he is. He's the one who looks,
Dark.
yeah, he looks like a African. I always thought he was holding something there. That's just a little piece of his fabric of his coat. His hand looks clenched, right? And he's identified as Judas with that clenched hand. He's holding the 30 pieces. They must have been really small pieces of silver. They're all in his hand here. And he's pointing, don't look at me, you know, he's pointing at somebody else. I didn't betray him. But I thought it was so interesting that Lazarus blames Peter and takes the blame off of Judas. There were groups who were vying for power and pointing to each other as the culprits. Now, what garden did Jesus pray in before he was arrested?
Gethsemane.
Gethsemane. And what disciple pulled out a sword and cut off the ear of the high priest's servant?
Peter.
Peter. And what was the name of the servant whose ear was cut off? Then he was healed. Malchus. Yeah, Malchus. And how many times did Peter deny? 3. And before which Roman governor was Jesus brought for trial? Pilate. And who was the high priest who put the trial? Caiaphas. And what prisoner did they, Barabbas. And what did the Roman soldiers place on Jesus' head? Crown of thorns. And to which tetrarch, which is a tetrarch is a king who shares his kingdom with 2 other people. Who was the king that Pilate sent Jesus to? Herod Antipas, yes. And what's the Aramaic name for the place where Jesus was crucified? That means Golgotha. And who was forced by the Roman soldiers to carry the cross for Jesus?
Simon.
Simon. Mwah. And we're going to carry on until next week. We'll see you there. God bless.